We spend our entire lives chasing a finish line that doesn't exist. We think happiness is a trophy waiting for us at the end of a long career, a specific bank balance, or the perfect retirement. But I've lived 106 years, longer than most empires last, and I'm here to tell you, you've been lied to. I have buried wives, outlived my children, and watched my business crumble to ash at 60. If happiness were a circumstance, I should be the most miserable man on earth. Instead, I am the happiest man I know. In the next 25 minutes, I will show you the exact psychological shift I made to survive the unsurvivable, and why your current search for joy is the very thing keeping it from you. Pay attention, because time is the only thing I have more of than you do. Welcome to the end of a century. My name is Sal, and as I sit here on this porch at 106 years old, I realize that most people view a life this long as a miracle of biology. They ask me about my diet, my exercise routine, or my genetics. But the truth is far more complex and, frankly, more beautiful than a simple list of habits. I have lived through 20 presidents, 2 world wars, and the rise and fall of technologies that seemed like magic when I was a boy. Yet, the most important lesson I've learned didn't come from a book or a doctor. It came from the dirt of my own failures. At 106, the world looks different. The noise of the world, the politics, the fashion, the endless must-haves, it all falls away, leaving only the core of what it means to be alive. People think that at my age, you're just waiting for the lights to go out. But they couldn't be more wrong. For the first time in my life, I can finally see the light clearly. My story of happiness actually begins with profound sadness. I was only 5 years old when I stood at my mother's graveside. It was 1925, and the world was a harsh place for a boy without a mother's touch. I remember the smell of the damp earth and the heavy black wool of my father's coat. That was my first introduction to the great theft, the realization that anything you love can be taken away in a heartbeat. For a long time, that trauma defined me. I walked through my youth with a clenched fist, waiting for the next blow. I thought that by being hard, I could protect myself from being hurt again. Most of you watching this have experienced a loss that felt like it ended your world. You think that the scar is the final chapter of your story. But loss is not the end of the book. It is the ink used to write the most important pages. It took me nearly 80 years to understand that the hole in your heart isn't an empty space. It's a vessel. Then came Anna Maria. If my childhood was a storm, she was the sun breaking through the clouds. We met when the world was vibrating with the energy of the post-war era. We were young, we were invincible, and we were deeply in love. I remember the way the light hit the courtyard when we danced. I remember thinking that I had finally made it. I had escaped the shadow of my mother's death and built a sanctuary. But life has a way of testing the foundations we build, especially when we think they are made of stone. We lived in a beautiful bubble of domesticity, raising children and dreaming of a future that seemed guaranteed. The greatest illusion of youth is the belief that later is a promise. I didn't know then that our time together was being measured in grains of sand that were already running low. I was living for the future, unaware that the present was the only thing I truly possessed. The flat line of a heart monitor is a sound that never leaves you. At age 31, I became a widower. Anna Maria was gone, and I was left with a house full of her scent and the echoes of her laughter, but no wife. This was my second great loss. I remember sitting in the dark, the weight of the silence pressing against my chest like a physical hand. I was angry. I was furious at a universe that would take a young mother and leave a grieving man in the wreckage. This is the moment where most people stay. They build a monument to their grief and live inside it for the rest of their lives. They become the man who lost his wife, or the woman who lost her career. I almost did that. I almost let my bitterness become my identity. I felt that if I were happy again, I would be betraying her memory. But then I looked at my children's faces, their eyes searching mine for a reason to feel safe, and I realized that my misery was a poison I was feeding them daily. Decades later, at age 58, the world took from me again. This time, it wasn't a person, but my livelihood. I had spent my life building a business, a manufacturing plant that I thought would be my legacy. In a single year of economic shifts and bad luck, it was gone. I stood in front of that padlocked gate in the rain, feeling like a failure. To the world, I was an old man whose time had passed. They said, Salah's done. At 58, you're supposed to be coasting toward retirement, not starting over from zero. But here is the secret I learned in that rain. Loss is a pruning process. A tree cannot grow taller if it is weighed down by dead branches. I had to lose my business to find my soul. I had spent so much time being a businessman that I had forgotten how to be a human being. My worth was tied to my balance sheet, and when the balance hit zero, I thought I hit zero too. I was wrong. My value wasn't in what I owned, but in how I responded to owning nothing. There is a specific kind of meditation that happens in the kitchen. When I lost my business at 58, I found myself with something I hadn't possessed in 40 years, empty hands. For decades, those hands had signed paychecks, gripped steering wheels, and hammered out deals. Now, they were idle. I remember the first time I decided to bake a loaf of bread from scratch. It felt foolish at first, a man of my stature needing dough. But as I felt the resistance of the flour and water, I realized that I was literally shaping my own survival. Most people think that to find peace, you have to go to a mountaintop or a temple. The truth is much more grounded. Peace is found in the repetitive motions of a simple life. I learned that if I could focus entirely on the texture of the dough, I couldn't focus on the fear of my bank account. I was training my brain to live in the now. We spend our lives building skyscrapers of worry, but you can only live on the ground floor. This was the beginning of my understanding that happiness is a sensory experience, not a cognitive one. Inside every person watching this, there is a constant internal dialogue. I call it the two doors. After my first wife, Anna Maria, passed, I spent months standing in front of the door of resentment. I wanted to kick it down. I wanted to scream at the unfairness of a world that took a mother from her toddlers. But eventually, you realize that the door of resentment leads to a room with no windows. It is a tomb for the living. Bitterness is a poison you drink, hoping your enemies will die. I had to consciously turn my back on that door and walk toward the door of presence. It wasn't a one-time decision. It was a choice I had to make every single morning at 6 a.m. I had to decide, am I going to be the man who was wronged or the man who is here? Choosing joy isn't about ignoring the pain. It's about refusing to let the pain be the only thing in the room. This is the hardest work you will ever do, far harder than any job I ever had. I remember looking at my children's faces in that old 1950s backyard. They were so small, and their world had just been shattered. As a father, you want to fix everything, but I couldn't fix their mother's absence. What I realized was that if I allowed my grief to consume me, I would be stealing their childhood twice. First, they lost their mother to nature. Second, they would lose their father to sorrow. I had to learn to perform happiness until it became real. I would play catch, I would tell stories, and I would laugh, even when my heart felt like a lead weight. People call this faking it, but I call it planting it. You plant the seeds of the emotion you want to feel, even if the soil is currently dry. Eventually, the acting becomes the reality. I chose joy as a gift to them, and in doing so, it became a gift to myself. Your family doesn't need your perfection, they need your presence. They need to see that even when the world breaks, a person can remain whole. When I look in the mirror today, I don't see an old man. I see a map. Every wrinkle on my face is a trail I've walked. These lines around my eyes, those are from the thousands of times I chose to smile when it was easier to scowl. The deep furrow in my brow, that's from the 1930s, the 50s, and the 70s, times of great trial. Quote, your face is the autobiography of your soul. Many people my age, or even those in their 60s, spend a fortune trying to erase these lines. They want to look like they've never lived, never hurt, and never struggled. But why would I want to look like a blank page? I am a finished novel. At 106, there is a profound freedom in no longer being pretty. When you lose the burden of vanity, you gain the power of authenticity. I am no longer performing for a world that prizes youth. I am simply existing as a testament to endurance. There is a quiet, steady strength that comes when you stop fighting the clock and start listening to its rhythm. There is a specific kind of silence that comes when the children grow up and the phone stops ringing as often. For many seniors, this silence is the enemy. It's when the regrets start to whisper. You think about the what-ifs. What if I had stayed in that city? What if I had said I love you more? MC6. I spent my 70s learning to make friends with that silence. I realized that the house wasn't empty, it was full of space. Space for me to finally get to know the man I had been running away from for 8 decades. Most of us spend our lives being human doings rather than human beings. We define ourselves by our productivity. But what happens when you are no longer productive by society's standards? If you haven't cultivated an inner life, the silence will feel like a prison. But if you have curiosity, if you have books, and if you have a sense of wonder, the silence becomes a sanctuary. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring and started listening to my own breath. Falling in love at 70 is a different kind of magic than falling in love at 20. At 20, it's all chemicals and future planning. At 70, it's about companionship and the profound recognition of another soul. When I met Gloria, I wasn't looking for a wife. I was looking for a witness. Someone to see me as I was, not as I used to be. We were two old ships that had weathered different storms, finding harbor in the same bay. Love is not just for the young. It is the reward for those who survive. We didn't have 50 years ahead of us, and we knew it. That made every cup of tea, every walk on the beach, and every sunset 1,000 times more vibrant. We didn't argue about the small things because we knew how few things were left. If you are sitting there thinking your heart is retired because you've reached a certain age, you are mistaken. The heart doesn't have a mandatory retirement age. It is capable of blooming in the middle of winter if you give it the light of connection. When Gloria and I started our life together at 70, I learned a hard lesson about the world. People would rather see you safely miserable than inappropriately happy. The whispers in our small community were like a low-frequency hum. They said it was too soon, even though I had been a widower for 40 years. They said it was undignified. I watched friends I'd known for decades cross the street to avoid the awkwardness of my newfound joy. It is a strange thing to realize that your happiness can be an offense to others. Why? Because when you choose to thrive in your later years, you hold up a mirror to their own fears of aging. They want to believe that life ends at 65 so they don't have to feel guilty about giving up on themselves. But I realized that if I let their judgment dictate my movements, I was giving them the keys to my casket. I had to learn the art of being socially invisible. I stopped looking for approval in their eyes and started looking for life in Gloria's. There is a profound, echoing silence that occurs when your own blood turns away from you. My son's decision to shun me was the most sophisticated pain I have ever felt. It wasn't the raw, explosive grief of a death. It was the slow, cold erosion of a living relationship. I spent many nights on my balcony, looking at the stars, wondering if I was being selfish. Was a few years of romantic companionship worth the soul-crushing silence of a son? The cost of integrity is often a period of isolation. I realized that if I walked away from Gloria to please my son, I wouldn't be gaining a relationship. I would be gaining a master. I would be teaching him that guilt is a valid way to control the people you love. So I stood my ground. I kept the door open, but I refused to crawl through it. I learned that you cannot carry someone else's emotional baggage and expect to walk a straight line. I chose to be a happy man at a distance rather than a miserable father in the same room. For 2 years, that iron gate of silence remained closed. I missed birthdays, I missed holidays, and I missed the mundane updates of a family's life. It felt like a limb had been amputated, and yet the ghost of it still itched every single day. Most people in their 70s or 80s would have buckled under that pressure. We are taught that family is everything, but we aren't taught what to do when family becomes the barrier to your soul's survival. What I didn't know then was that my son was fighting his own war with memory. He wasn't mad at me. He was mad at the passage of time. He was using me as a scapegoat for his own fear of getting older and losing his connection to his mother. By staying happy, by staying vibrant with Gloria, I was forced to wait for him to grow up. Even though he was already a middle-aged man, I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love you can show your children is to live a life so full that they eventually want to know how you did it. After the storm of the family conflict settled into a dull ache, I retreated into the sensory world. I began to treat my morning coffee like a religious ceremony. Have you ever truly tasted coffee? Not just gulped it down to wake up, but felt the heat of the ceramic mug against your palms and inhaled the dark, earthy steam? At 106, my world has shrunk in geography, but expanded in depth. I don't need to travel to Paris to see beauty. I can see it in the way the morning light hits a crusty loaf of bread on my kitchen table. Abundance is not having much, but needing little. We spend our middle years trying to accumulate big joys, the promotion, the new car, the exotic vacation. But those joys are temporary, they leak. The joy of a perfectly ripe peach or the feel of a soft linen shirt. Those are the joys that sustain you through a century. I stopped looking at the horizon and started looking at my feet. There is an entire universe in a square inch of garden soil if you are slow enough to see it. I often sit in my garden before the sun is fully up, watching the dew settle on the grass. Most people walk right over it, but if you get down low, which, admittedly, is harder for me these days, you see that every single drop of water is a perfect lens. It reflects the entire sky, the trees, and the house. It is a reminder that the big world is always contained within the small moments. This realization changed how I viewed my health. I stopped worrying about the big decline and started focusing on the small wins. Can I take 10 deep breaths of fresh air? Can I feel the sun on my skin? If the answer is yes, then I am a wealthy man. We are so busy mourning the bodies we used to have, the strength we had at 30, the speed we had at 50, that we fail to use the magnificent senses we still possess at 80 or 90. Your eyes can still see a sunset. Your ears can still hear a bird. Do not insult the life you have by pining for the life you had. In my second century of life, I have witnessed the birth of the digital ghost. I sit here with a smartphone, a device that would have been considered witchcraft when I was a boy, and I see my great-granddaughter's face. She is thousands of miles away, yet her laughter vibrates in the palm of my hand. For many of my peers, technology is a wall. They view it as the thing that killed the old ways. But I chose to see it as a bridge over the canyon of isolation. Most seniors allow their world to shrink geographically as their mobility fades, but your world only shrinks if you stop seeking connection. I learned to navigate these digital waters not because I care about the gadgets, but because I care about the pulse of life. When that screen lights up, I am not a 106-year-old man in a chair. I am a participant in the current of human history. Happiness in old age requires a refusal to be obsolete. You must remain a student of the world, even when the world feels like it's speaking a language you weren't born into. I keep a journal on my nightstand. It's an old, leather-bound book, and every night before I close my eyes, I write down 3 things. Not big things. I don't write, "I'm glad I'm alive," because that's too broad. I write, the weight of the fountain pen, the coldness of the pillowcase, or the way the neighbor's dog barked at the mailman. Gratitude is the only currency that doubles when you spend it. I realized in my 80s that the brain is a heat-seeking missile for problems. It is designed to find what is wrong so it can fix it. But when you are over 100, there are many things you cannot fix. If you focus on the broken parts of your life, you will live in a scrapyard. By writing in this ledger, I am force-feeding my brain a different diet. I am training my neural pathways to hunt for beauty. This is not positive thinking, which is often just a mask for denial. This is active noticing. It is a survival strategy that keeps the darkness of depression at a distance. People often ask me, "Sal, how can you be so happy after everything you've lost?" They think happiness is a mood that hits you like weather. It isn't. Happiness is a muscle, and most people are suffering from emotional atrophy. I spent my 106 years lifting the weight of my circumstances. Every time I chose not to complain about my hip pain, I was doing a rep of resilience. Every time I chose to be interested in a young person's story instead of rambling about my own past, I was building my empathy strength. If you wait until you feel good to be happy, you will be waiting until you're in the grave. You have to work the muscle when it's sore. You have to practice joy when you are tired, when you are grieving, and when you are lonely. By the time you reach my age, that muscle will be so strong it can carry the weight of your entire life without buckling. Most people die with weak hearts, not biologically, but spiritually. Don't let your spirit be the first thing that fails you. I watch the world from my window now. I see people rushing to work, their faces buried in their phones, their shoulders hunched under the weight of someday. They are traveling at 60 miles per hour, but they aren't going anywhere. I am sitting still, yet I am traveling through the deepest layers of human experience. The soul travels at the speed of a walking man. At 106, I have finally caught up with my soul. There is a great irony in aging. When you finally have the wisdom to enjoy life, you often lack the speed to chase it. But that is the secret gift of the senior years. The chase was always the distraction. When you stop chasing, the joy catches up to you. I see the beauty in the dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. I see the epic drama in a sparrow building a nest. I am a stationary traveler, exploring the infinite depth of the present moment. If you are in your 60s or 70s, stop running toward the next thing. Sit still long enough for your life to find you. There is a science to what I am telling you. Doctors tell me that my brain chemistry is different from many men my age. They see high levels of happy neurotransmitters, the same ones you see in monks who have meditated for 50 years. But I am no monk. I am just a man who refused to house the stress hormones of modern life. Every time you worry about a future that hasn't happened, you are pouring acid into your own veins. I decided decades ago that I would not be a container for poison. I learned to observe a stressful thought as if it were a passing car. I see it, I acknowledge it, but I don't get in and let it drive me. This alchemy, turning the lead of daily stress into the gold of internal peace, is the real reason I have reached 106. Your thoughts are the architects of your physical health. You cannot build a healthy body in a house of toxic thoughts. Life is not a lake, it is an ocean. And after 106 years, I can tell you that the storms never actually stop. You just become a better captain. I remember a period in my 80s when it felt like every friend I had ever known was passing away. It was a storm of grief that threatened to capsize my steady peace. Every phone call was an obituary. Every Sunday was a funeral. It would have been easy to view myself as a sinking ship. But I looked at a lighthouse and realized its purpose isn't to stop the waves. Its purpose is to remain unmoving while the waves do their work. I decided to be the lighthouse for my remaining family. I realized that my stability was their navigation. If you are in your 70s and feeling the waves of loss, do not try to fight the ocean. Simply find your light and keep it burning. The storm will pass, as they all do, and you will still be there, salted and weathered, but upright. I found an old letter recently, tucked into the back of a drawer. It was from the 1940s, written in my own hand to my father. The ink was smudged, and the paper was brittle, but the emotions were raw and immediate. It reminded me that we are all just a series of selves layered on top of one another. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. We often spend our senior years litigating our past mistakes. We put our younger selves on trial for crimes they didn't know they were committing. At 106, I have granted myself a universal pardon. I look at that letter, and I see a young man who was doing the best he could with the limited tools he had. If you are carrying the weight of a choice you made 40 years ago, let it go. You are not that person anymore. You are the person who survived the consequences, and that makes you a scholar of life, not a prisoner of it. There is a grandfather clock in my hallway that has been ticking since before the Great Depression. Its rhythm is slow, steady, and utterly indifferent to the chaos of the world. I have learned to synchronize my heart to that clock. In your younger years, time is a predator. It's always chasing you, always running out. But in your second century, time becomes a companion. It stops being something you spend and becomes something you inhabit. Most people are terrified of the ticking because they think it's a countdown. I hear it as a heartbeat. Each tick is a confirmation that I am still part of the symphony. I stopped trying to pack my days with achievements and started packing them with awareness. When you stop fighting time, time rewards you with a clarity that the young can never buy. You begin to see the architecture of a long life, how every tragedy was a support beam for the joy that followed. I have a small corner of my garden that I've left wild. There are some old stones there, ruins of a shed that fell down decades ago. Now, they are covered in moss and vibrant wildflowers. It is the most beautiful part of the yard. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. This is the ultimate metaphor for aging. Your body will eventually become a ruin. Your joints will stiffen like old hinges, and your memory may become overgrown with the weeds of time. But look at what grows in the ruins. Wisdom, empathy, and a sense of humor that only comes from having seen it all. I am not broken. I am reclaimed. I have been repurposed by time into something far more complex than the new version of myself ever was. If you are feeling the physical ruin of age, stop looking at the cracked stones and start looking at the flowers growing between them. You are a masterpiece of endurance. Sometimes, Gloria is away, or I am simply alone in the house. I set the table with the good china, I pour a glass of wine, and I light a candle. Just for me. Many seniors eat over the sink or in front of the television, treating themselves as a guest they don't really like. This is a mistake. Solitude is a luxury. Loneliness is a disease. The difference between the two is how you treat yourself when no one is watching. If you don't value your own company, why should anyone else? I have learned to be my own best friend. I tell myself jokes, I recount my favorite memories, and I appreciate the silence. When you reach the point where you are genuinely content in an empty room, you become invincible. No one can take your peace away because no one gave it to you in the first place. You are the host of your own life. Act accordingly. If I were to visualize my life, I wouldn't see a straight line. I would see a glowing forest with two paths constantly diverging. Every hour, we are at a crossroads. Do I choose to complain about the cold, or do I choose to appreciate the warmth of my sweater? Do I choose to focus on the son who shunned me, or the great-granddaughter who called me? The path you walk is paved with the thoughts you repeat. At 1:06, I am very careful about where I walk. I don't let my mind wander into the dark woods of "it's too late." It is never too late to have a happy childhood, and it is never too late to have a vibrant old age. The path of joy is always available, but it is often overgrown because so few people walk it. It requires a machete of will to clear the way, but once you start walking it, the path becomes a highway. In my dreams, I often sit at a table with all the versions of Sal. There is the 5-year-old orphan, the 20-year-old lover, the 58-year-old failure, and the 70-year-old rebel. We sit together in a council of memory. I realize now that I am not just the 106-year-old man. I am all of them, simultaneously. When I laugh, it is the 5-year-old's laugh. When I love, it is the 70-year-old's courage. This is the secret of longevity. Never kill off your previous versions. Keep them alive, keep them talking, and keep them integrated. Most people try to grow up and leave their younger selves behind, but those younger versions are your battery. They provide the energy that your old bones lack. I am a centenarian with the curiosity of a child and the fire of a young man. I am a crowd of one. Every morning, the sun rises over the Atlantic, and I am there to greet it. People think that at my age, every sunset is a goodbye, but I see every sunrise as a hello. As long as you are breathing, you are participating. There is no such thing as a wasted day if you were conscious for it. I look at the horizon and I don't feel like my time is running out. I feel like my capacity is expanding. I am still learning new things about history, about science, about the human heart. If you are 65, you might have 40 years left. Think about that. 40 years is a lifetime in itself. Don't spend it waiting for the end. Spend it as if you were just starting a new book. The horizon isn't a wall. It's just the limit of your current vision. Walk toward it, and the world will keep opening up. So here we are. I've given you a century of my life in 25 minutes. My voice might be thin, and my skin might be like parchment, but my soul is heavier and more solid than it has ever been. If you remember nothing else from my story, remember this. Happiness is not something that happens to you. It is something you do. It is a radical, defiant act of the will. I am 106 years old, and I am telling you that life is hard, life is unfair, and life is short, even when it's long. But it is also magnificent. Do not waste another minute waiting for the perfect conditions to be happy. The conditions are never perfect. The secret is that you are the secret. You are the source. Now, turn off this screen, go to the window, find one small thing that is beautiful, and give it your full attention. That is how you start your own century of joy.